You're listening to the Bombad Generals.
General?
Hey, welcome back to the Bombad Generals. It's your host, Seth, and I'm here with the one and only...
Matt. That's me.
The legendary Matt Bronson. Unfortunately, you are now ranked number 3 on ELO. How are you feeling about that?
I was going to say, yeah, we have to issue a retraction for our interview with Kyle Dornbos last week. Just seamless plug. If you haven't listened to that one, I'd say check it out. Picking his brain about how he approaches the game of Legion. Really good time. But we talked about the latest ELO update as we knew it then. He beat me out by 1 point to regain the title of number 1 North America ranked player. And turns out neither of us are. Luke Cook has taken back the crown. So the eternal world champion since 2019, Luke Cook, back to being number 1. But we'll try to change that up at LVO.
Yeah, congratulations.
But I'm devastated. Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Matt. Congratulations to you, Luke, for getting that. And I know you guys have been asking a ton about Todd and where is Todd. I wish I could say he's here this week, but unfortunately he is not. He is actually practicing slots for LVO. So look out for him at LVO because I think he will be hitting the slot machines at LVO. So go find Todd at LVO. Well, yeah, we're going into our next segment, and that is, what are you running? Now, Matt, you told me that you're running a very niche, interesting list. Tell us about that list you were running.
Yeah, so we had a local this past weekend, so I got a couple games in with a Din Tons list. So really the reason I wanted to do this was I haven't put Tons on the table for a long time, and I think they're getting a bit worse here with the new climbing rules when troopers can get on buildings to get out of the way of them. So I kind of just want to get them on the table again. I love getting the Din model on the table. I think it's a great model. And it's kind of a different list than I usually run. It's very in your face, get to your lines, and cause a lot of havoc. So for me, I would classify that more in the aggro side of lists as opposed to something more cagey. And that's kind of what I wanted to transition to talk about today, because I think, well, first things first, let's define, we were talking about in the pre-show, what is an aggro list really? How would you define an aggro list, Seth?
I would define an aggro list by a list that wants to get up and in your face at least range 2, if not range 1. And so one thing that their sole purpose is to charge you with all they got and to have their whole army hit you all at once from multiple different sides or from the same spot, but put a lot of pressure on the opponent's army and just go full aggro without even focusing on the objectives, really.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think there is one other factor when you compare it to, let's say, a gun line or Blizzard Force. Blizzard Force can be pretty aggro, but I wouldn't fully go there with it. Those lists, they try to get in pretty much everything in Legion is going to try to hit you all at once. But as you said, you're doing it from close range with an aggro list. And I think those lists, the thing about them is you're going to lose something on the way in. Usually the way they're designed is that you take a whole bunch of units, which if you send one set of Wookiees or one Taun into the enemy forces, they can deal with it pretty easily. But if you send 3, or you could do even 4 Tauns in Echo Base, you send them all forwards, one will die, but then the rest will make it to the lines, and at that point you're banking on they can't handle it fast enough before it's causing a lot of problems for them. So for me, it's that distinction which honestly makes aggro lists tough for me to play, and they're not really in my wheelhouse. So full transparency, I don't think our discussion today, I don't think it's a strength of mine necessarily, but I think it's good to talk about, between us, how we approach aggro lists and what you need to know going into that. So you've played a lot of Yoda with Wookiees. Would you classify those as more on the aggro side of things, or do you think they're kind of more in a midway between a traditional gun line, something cagey and conservative, or do you think they fall into our definition here?
Yeah, no, I'd actually classify it as more of a hybrid, because you have Chewbacca. Like, because I normally run Chewbacca with Yoda and Wookiees, that's like 3 big melee threats right there, and so it could be super aggro, but like it also could be like kind of cagey, and sometimes it needs to be kind of cagey because. Like if I lose my Wookiees, then it's like the list kind of it's not aggro anymore, and so it'd be a hybrid. I would say you would for a good solid aggro list, you probably need like 4 to 5 like super aggressive units that are just charging in there.
Right, so we're probably talking about like Yoda, like the Bushfax list from almost a year ago at this point, where it was Yoda, Chewie, and then 3 sets of Wookiees, right? Where you've got a lot of that stuff. When you're rocking one Wookiee, you can be cagey with one Wookiee and kind of pick your moment. When you're running a bunch of them, or you're running, Din Tons as the example that started this all, you can't be cagey. And that was my struggle when I started playing these sort of lists. And I haven't done, again, that much, but I'm very used to playing the control style of game. Keep things from dying, preserve activations, pick your moments. Don't take too much firepower all at once. And if you try to do that, one of the first times I remember really getting wrecked like this was I was trying to do Anakin Wookiees. And basically I didn't want to lose anything. So I played conservatively, and then I lost everything because I couldn't engage, I couldn't cause damage back, so they just sat at range and picked me apart, right? So that's where the distinction comes in. To play these aggro lists well, you have to be okay with something dying. Obviously, you don't want something to die, you want to still be careful and limit it, but you have to be okay with, you know what, I'm going to send everything forward, and if something dies, that's okay, because I'll make it up in the later game.
Yeah, I think aggro, you have to commit all in. Like, you can't build an aggro list and not commit it. Like, you're committed turn 1 to just charge in, and you're gonna lose some dudes. Like, it's gonna happen. But I have firsthand experience on the receiving end of the aggro list that if the aggro list hits hard and hits right, it really messes up your play because you have to deal with a lot of units close up to you. And like, especially with only one force user can deal with 1 to 2 units coming to lines. But when it's like 3 to 4, like maybe 5, like it's really tough to handle. And one force user can't handle that all, especially if you're running a gunline list. Like, you are, like, I'm sorry to say that, but if that aggro player plays it really well, like, that gunline is pretty screwed. Yeah,
and you mentioned kind of like aggro lists don't really play objectives, which is kind of true. They kind of play objectives in a different way, I think.
Yeah.
Right? Like a aggro list playing breakthrough isn't the, like classic Tons, even at the height of their powers, they wouldn't stick around to actually score at the end of the game.
Yeah.
But they would cause so much disruption in the meantime that you had to spend, 3, 4, 5 turns dealing with them, that by the time all of that is done, you're too far behind in objectives and you can't catch up, right? And that's kind of how the game went for me this weekend. I played 1 game of Payload and 1 game of Hostage, right? And it's just, okay, let stuff happen for the first few turns. I'm not really going to focus on those things. You can kill my hostage, grab my hostage. But the Tons are going to be taking care of everything else, or, the Wookiees. And when you get to turn 4, turn 5, turn 6, sure, maybe you've killed my threats, but now you don't have enough left that hopefully I've got 1 more power piece than you to bring it home. As far as getting better with aggro lists, which is a journey that I'd say I'm still on, and I think is a useful journey, even if you are like me and more of a conservative, cagey gunline player. The sort of lists that can mess me up are those ones that get me off kilter and come right at me. So to better understand those, I try to play them, and to get better at them, you just have to get reps. It's like a lot of things in Legion, you just have to do it, because then you'll have the experiences like me where you were a little bit too conservative and you get your butt kicked, and then you say, okay, what did I do wrong? Next game, maybe you go too aggressive and you're hanging guys out in the open and you die too fast. and it takes a little bit of fine tuning, but with reps, you could have some good success still, I think, with those more aggressive lists. So moving on, today we got the Dark Troopers article, so now we know Gideon plus the Dark Troopers.
Hey-o.
We'll experiment more, at least on my side, a bit after LVO, since they're not actually released until February, but initial thoughts. We haven't talked between the two of us yet too much about these guys, so I'm interested to hear what you think.
So Dark Troopers coming in at 95 points. I think they're pretty reasonably costed, with the whole armor and plotting, the double activation. Super awesome design choices that AMG went with these. First initial thoughts, when the heavies, when I first looked at the article, I was like, oh, this is actually kind of underwhelming. Heavies are super expensive. It was smaller dice pools than I expected. But then combining with Moff Gideon, and then also cranking down some numbers, I was like, oh, they're decently pretty good. Especially with Moff Gideon. I don't think you take Dark Troopers without Moff Gideon, in my opinion, but because I feel like that's where a lot of their value comes from.
I kind of agree, and so I think they kind of go together. I could see maybe an argument for taking them without, but I think probably if you're taking one, you're taking the other.
They seem really good. They're super expensive, really hard to put in a list with the Force user, in my opinion. But I think they are also a good deterrent to Force users because of the double activation. But that's some of my first thoughts. Matt, tell me your first thoughts.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of it. The double activation and their melee profile, they throw a red and a white each. The fact that they activate twice makes it a little tricky for Jedi to engage them, because a lot of their regular tricks don't necessarily work. If you move into them and stand by, they can withdraw, you can move into them again, and then they still have another activation, right? Or they punch you, you lightsaber them, and then they activate later, punch you again. Now, they are very slow, in a sense. If they're trying to chase someone, they're pretty slow, because they can do only a speed 1 move once per activation, but over the course of around 2 speed 1 moves is essentially a speed 3 move, so they're not the slowest thing in the world. I think one of the big things to think about is that when you start adding heavies to them, they're expensive, they're maybe a little underwhelming, but you get 2 uses out of them, potentially.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And you have to take 6 wounds through armor and red saves before you actually lose a heavy, because you have the base unit as 3 guys, which means you've got 2 generic dudes, that's 4 wounds, and then you have to do 2 wounds beyond that for the heavy to die. So they're expensive. I like them at 188 points with the assault cannon, the frag launcher, basically the 2 guns and the programming upgrade, and that's essentially 2 94-point activations because they activate twice.
Yeah.
And they hit kind of like that. I think it's all going to come down to what are the tricks that they can do because they are 1 unit activating twice. We haven't seen a lot of that in this game.
I crunched on some numbers for the Dark Troopers, kind of their offensive, defensive output. And before we get in those, I want to talk about the programming card, the programmed loyalty. It's 5 points. Highly recommend you bringing this 5 points where you get retinue commander. Of course, the downside is that you can only be issued orders by a commander unit. I think the only person that kind of is affected is Vader.
Op Vader or Boba Fett, if you are running rule with respect, you can't order these guys. But on that turn, if you've got Gideon, you can entourage them still, or you're probably not running that card because I would rather run Boba Rocket and the Gideon 3-pip, most likely. Yeah. So that drawback I don't think will come into play very often.
So the retinue commander is super good. If you don't know what retinue is, it's get an aim or dodge at the start of the activation phase when you're within range 1 to 2 of a commander. So some of the offensive output that they have, that the Dark Troopers have with the assault cannon and the frag launcher. So with an aim, so with that retinue aim, it's 7 to 8 hits just with an aim. I know.
And if you're at range 2, you're getting blast.
Yeah, that's
which is
blast.
really nice.
Yeah, it's so your opponent has to roll 7 to 8 hits. Without an aim, it's 6 hits, so still really good without an aim. But I would still recommend getting that aim. You're not really going to use retinue for a dodge, just because a dodge on an armor unit without outmaneuver is just worthless in my opinion.
It's not great. It's not great, especially since they cannot get cover.
Yeah. Yes. Now, if it's just the assault cannon with an extra dude, so let's say your frag launcher is exhausted, you're still rocking 6 to 7 hits with an aim.
That's good.
That's still pretty good. And then you have 5 hits without an aim. So again, that aim's super helpful. And then just the assault cannon. So you're rocking about 5 to 6 hits with an aim, 4 hits without an aim. Again, that's not blast, so cover will come into play with that. And then let's talk about like melee. So the Myrtleizer, it's 2 red, 1 black.
Myrted.
First of all, I think it's difficult to get them in melee just because of how slow
proactively.
they are.
Proactively, you're not really going to be able to lock things down a lot of the time.
But if you do not lock things down, here's what you get. With the Myrtleizer, with an aim, it's 6 hits. Without an aim, it's about 5 hits. And then with the Myrtleizer and an extra dude, with an aim, it's 7 hits. Without an aim, it's 6 hits. So I think you're still going to want to do ranged attacks because it's about the same consistency as what your melee would have.
I think the thing about the Myrtleizer as well, we talked about Jedi and their tricks with standbys. It is suppressive, so if someone tries to standby into you, you can hit them, knock off the standby right away. Again, more of a defensive tool. I think you still want the guns, so you can kind of threaten. You're still very threatening in melee with just 5 guys and 2 activations, but the Myrtleizer is cheap. And it looks cool. You got a big-ass cricket bat that you can smack guys with.
It's a super cool model.
I liked that you broke down the offensive stats with the exhausted frag launcher because, remember, cycle happens at the end of an activation, which means if you're activating these guys twice, you could use it in one activation and then not use it in the other activation, and it cycles back.
Yes.
So I think that's generally going to be the best way to do it, as opposed to recover shooting all of the time. And then that means you're doing 1 shot with a frag launcher and 1 shot where the frag launcher is just using the 1 black die from the weapon. And they're both solid.
Now, let's talk a little bit about defensive. So if you are a Force user going up against Dark Troopers, I highly recommend that you do not get in melee with the Dark Troopers, and here's why. If you are Anakin and you swing your lightsaber at the Dark Troopers, you're only doing an average of 4 wounds. With that, you haven't even taken out a heavy yet. So Anakin's 4 wounds, Operative Luke is 3 wounds, Maul is 2 to 3 wounds, Maul with the Darksaber is 3 wounds, and then Dooku is also 3 wounds.
It's probably not going to trade very well. You might work him down eventually, but you will be bruised and bloodied coming out of that. So I think it's a good time as well to kind of transition to Moff Gideon, because a couple of reasons. We talked about programmed loyalty and getting tokens when you're at range 1 to 2 of a commander. Something else that works at 1 to 2 is entourage. So getting a free order from Moff Gideon. So they combo really well together there. You could get a free order and most of the time a free aim. If it's a list where you're only running Moff Gideon, so maybe Imperial Remnant when we see that, or a regular list where you don't have any other characters, then aggressive tactics is good as well, because then they're getting a surge. So now they have a surge available for defense or maybe for offense, which is essentially adding another hit or block probably every turn. And he's just a pretty cheap 100 point base Courage 3 unit, which these days with the suppression changes is pretty good to have, because now you have to leave someone with 7 suppression at the end of the turn so that they have 6, which is a panic. Again, I was saying, I think a lot of the value for Dark Troopers comes with the tricks they can do, activating twice. Well, Moff Gideon has the 2-pip, where they can teleport across the board on turn 2 and beyond. Or, either offensively to get in position, or defensively, maybe they've grabbed an objective and they want to come back home. It costs you one of your 2 activations, but it brings a lot of utility. And I think that's Gideon's strongest command card, which is why if you don't have a Dark Trooper to make use of that, I think you leave him at home. Yeah. But also, it really takes the Dark Troopers up to 11 and brings their utility into another level. And that's why you want to pair the two together.
And then going into his 3-pip, the 3-pip is issue orders to 3 core or heavy units. And units issue orders by this card gain fire support. I think fire support is really cool on the Dark Troopers, especially because they activate twice. So you could give them an order and they still get to go again. So they can add their dice pool to a like Moff or a different unit and still attack on their same turn. I did some stats because you want Moff Gideon to be within range 2 of your Dark Troopers to get that retinue. And let's say you play this 3-pip and Moff Gideon, you pull Moff out of the stack. Here's what'll happen. If you fire support the double heavy Dark Troopers with Moff Gideon into heavy cover, you're hitting 9 hits.
Ooh.
with Moff. Yeah, that is with an aim because he has tactical 1.
Yep.
And for red saves, that's an average of 5 to 6 wounds.
Did you factor in that he has Observe 1 as well for an additional reroll?
You know what? I did not.
So even better, potentially. Yeah, his gun is only 1 to 2, so that's a bit of a limitation. But other than that, he's an amazing fire support platform because he can move, shoot, he has an aim, free action observe, so that's essentially 3 dice you're rerolling. And let's say you reroll a red and a black with the aim, and the red still blanks out, then you can reroll that red again with the observe.
Yep.
And you should be getting a hit out of that. He's got Sharpshooter 1, so the best they can do is light cover, and he's surging to crit, so he's taking that dice pool that wouldn't surge before or just had critical 1, and now applying surges across, which is going to be another hit or 2. So he's actually a really solid fire support platform if he's in position to capitalize that. One important thing when we're talking about this card particularly, the order has to come from the card for you to get fire support, which means if you want to fire support with the Dark Troopers, you can't give them the order via Entourage. So you can't like give out 3 core orders and then Entourage to the Dark Troopers and then fire support. It has to come from the card, which isn't a big deal, something to be aware of. I think one other thing to highlight with Dark Troopers particularly, and Moff Gideon is great for this because he's got a couple command slots, improvised orders, fantastic. Dark Troopers will always have at least 1 token in the bag, so improvised orders is great for delaying that token draw so that you get it when you want to. I think a lot of the time I'm going to be holding their face up until after I've gone with their random order. Not necessarily all the time, but I think that's going to be the best thing, to go back to back with Dark Troopers, or at least control their second activation more so than controlling the first.
We've talked about this on a previous podcast, but one kind of play you have to watch out for Dark Troopers is if, let's say, your first activation with Dark Troopers, you move and attack, and your second activation is you want to take a standby. Unfortunately, you cannot take a standby because you've already attacked during that round. So you have to watch out for that, unless AMG changes the rules for that on Monday. We'll see.
Yeah. We're talking about how, Dark Troopers could be scary. If you're really worried about someone else bringing Dark Troopers, what are ways to counter them? I can think of one really good one in Republic.
Oh, fire support Anakin.
Yeah.
Saber throw.
With an RPS especially. Impact 2 from the RPS, Impact 3 from Anakin Saber. If he's got Surge Crit, you might take out 3 guys in 1 fire support. You might take out 4 guys in 1 fire support with Impact 5, Surge Crit, Pierce 3. So that is a very effective way to take out Dark Troopers. I think because of how they interact with objectives, they're going to be harder to ignore than a lot of heavies are.
I agree.
Because right now you can kind of ignore tanks if you can't deal with them very well. I think that's going to be tougher with Dark Troopers. Now, the good thing is, they lose effectiveness with wounds, more so than tanks. But the bad news is they've got more health than tanks do. If you've got 2 heavies, you're looking at 10 health behind armor.
Yeah.
12 if you're going with the extra guy, which I think is a little too expensive, but it is an option. But there is actually one interaction that is kind of cool. At least, again, caveat to all of this, under the current rules. Impact happens before Guardian. So even if they roll 6 hits and have Impact 2, they can only turn 2 of those to crits. So they do that first, and then you get to Guardian what's left. So if you have a Protector IRG around, you can wait until they choose which dice to turn to crits, tap Protector, Guardian, up to 2 of those away. So you can take those wounds, make those saves on IRG instead. You can heal back the IRG if you need to, and you can keep those Dark Troopers at full power for longer. And if they decide not to attack the Dark Troopers because of that, great, you still have Guardian for the rest of your army. As we've talked about before, Guardian is an incredible keyword. Making the points work is a little tough, but I think it is going to be a pretty strong combo that I'm going to be looking at when I'm building lists with Dark Troopers. So do you have a list that you've made that that's bouncing around in your head that uses Dark Troopers that you want to talk about briefly?
No, because I'm a Republic player.
Oh, true. Well, I've got one, and I think we'll link it in the description in case people want to play around with it and look at the exact upgrades and stuff. But basically, it's Moff Gideon with just improvised orders. You get Boba Fett in there with C's so that he can get an order on the 3-pip turn. So you can control him going first if he needs to in fire supporting. You've got Shore Troopers, 2 of those with T-21s. You've got a couple Mortars, a couple T-21 Storms, and then Dark Troopers with the 2 gun upgrades and the programmed loyalty. So comes in at 9 activations, but it's kind of like 10 because the Dark Troopers are going twice. You're at 798. You got a lot of beef between Dark Troopers and Boba. You're kind of making it tough for Jedi to get into your lines. If you really wanted to, you could give Moff Gideon the Darksaber if you drop some stuff. We didn't talk much about the Darksaber, but I think for me it's, am I running Moff Gideon alone? Yes. Then I probably have his 1-pip, in which case I'm definitely taking the Darksaber. If I'm not running the 1-pip, maybe not. But yeah, I think that's the first thing I'm going to try. And if you guys try it out, let us know how that goes. And I think that takes us to the end of our first section here. So we'll go to the break briefly, and then we'll be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Hondo Inaka's Vitamin Supplements. My man Hondo is an experienced and well-respected businessman, and he's got an innovative new sales technique. He wants to get his supplements out to the market, so he wants you to help sell them and recruit friends to do the same. Buy a bunch of vitamins from Hondo, then sell them to customers. Also, if you recruit friends to sell them, then you'll get a portion of all their future sales. If those friends recruit friends, then you get a portion of those sales as well. It's easy money with what Hondo calls triangular investing. Learn for yourself at thisventureisdefinitelyprofitable.com.
Welcome back to Bombad Generals, and our next section is the top tactical tactic. Matt, what is our top tactical tactic today?
We've mentioned it a couple times. There's a new rulebook coming out on Monday, January 16th, so we've got a pretty simple tactical tactic today. Read the rulebook, study the rulebook. A lot is going to change. So read through it. I'm going to be reading through it cover to cover, making a list and checking it twice as far as questions I've got for the rules forum. Peruse the rules forum because there could be a number of clarifications there. You know, especially if you're going to LVO, you don't want to show up not understanding some weird interactions. So I'd say, like, you got to know it. There's just no options. But you know, reading it cover to cover, that's going to take a lot of time. Quickly, Seth, what is the first thing you're going to look at? Are you just going to start from the top and read down, or are you going to flip to a certain page first?
So there's actually 2 different things I'm specifically looking at. And one, that is the tournament doc, because they did say they are releasing a tournament doc alongside this rulebook. And so I'm watching out for that. I'm hoping for an errata. So if so, I'm going to be looking at that. But regarding the core rulebook, the first thing I'll probably look at is there's been a lot of rumors about exemplar keyword changing. And I think I'm going to turn in and just look at that exemplar keyword. Like, is Anakin and Padme, like, are they nerfed pretty hard? Are they still good? Can they still share standbys? Like, I'll be looking at that, and then I'll read the rest of the rulebook.
Yeah.
How about you, Matt? What is, like, when you open that rulebook, what is the first thing you're going to?
The thing I want to look at is climbing, 100%, because of all the snippets that we got in the articles, I think climbing we have the most open question marks about, at least from my perspective. How many actions does it take? Does it count for things like relentless? Can I do free actions like that off of it? Do I get tactical when I climb? Can I climb when I'm doing a speed X move, like force push or Leia's 2-pip or Simple Man, stuff like that? So there's a lot of open-ended questions that I want to know about, because how climbing works is going to be very interesting for a lot of lists. And the things it opens up. Or maybe doesn't open up if it's more restrictive than we've thought. We've seen, you and I, in the game we played, that's on our YouTube again, seamless plug, what Jumping Vader can do when ruled that, we'll play it where he can do relentless, right? It's wild. So that's the thing for me that I want to see first and foremost is, how does this work? And then probably I'll go back up to the top and just start reading.
I'm really curious to see the interactions between climb and like scale, and just how they're going to really balance that out to make scale still a reasonable keyword. That's
a good point. I might read climbing and then go and read expert climber, scale, and jump, just to see how those change, and then back to the top. Of course, we have no idea how this could be formatted. You might not want to jump around a whole lot. It's supposed to be more intuitive and easy to read, so hopefully it works well if you just start at the top and go through. But those would be the spots I'm looking at closely.
Yes. And we want to plug a friend real fast. Our friend David Endless, he in his Yavin base, they are live streaming the reading of the core rulebook as soon as it comes out on Monday. So be on the lookout. The link for his Twitch channel is in the description. But if you want to join the community and reading the rulebook, check out his Twitch channel. If you listen to our PAX interview with David, he thinks a lot about Legion, and Yavin Base is a great place, and we definitely want to plug it every chance we get. Well, that's it for our top tactical tactic, and usually at this point of the podcast, we go into our key keyword of the day, but today there is no key keyword of the day because of the new rulebook coming out. Next week, we will be doing a podcast again on Friday. We will not be doing a player interview because we've done a number of those recently. So next weekend, we are just going to have an episode of myself and Seth talking through the new rules, things we noticed, very reasonable and well thought out takes that we can make up when the dust settles a few days in. So if you want hot takes, come to David's live stream on Monday night. If you want perfect takes that will age great, then come to our podcast next Friday. And we did mention a lot of stats and just like some dice rolls with some numbers. If you want to create your own, if you want to find out your own stats on dice statistics, just go to tellmetheodds.net. They got a great website for you to do that on your own. Fantastic. Yeah, I love dice simulators. There are simple things you can do in your head. At some point, you just need to simulate it. And Absolutely. Tell Me the Odds is the best one for that. So thanks, everyone, for listening again. If you want to hear more about Dart Troopers, stay tuned, and good luck with the new rulebook. Stay Gungan. This has been the Bombad Generals. Listening to Bombad Generals is not scientifically proven to make you a better Legion player. Side effects may include bad dice rolls, missed triggers, aim losses, bankruptcy, divorce, vomiting, and sudden death. Ask your doctor if Bombad Generals is right for you.